13 R&B singers, 13 stories of grief, trauma, addiction, abuse, and betrayal, and 13 songs that became some of the most unforgettable music ever recorded. Here's what nobody tells you. The songs that hit the deepest, the ones you reach for at 2 a.m, the ones that say what you couldn't find words for, most of them weren't born in a good moment. They were born in the worst one. Stay with me. Number 13, Whitney Houston, I Didn't Know My Own Strength, 2009.
Didn't know my own strength. I crashed down.
By 2006, the world had watched Whitney Houston fall. The interviews, the documentaries, the appearance on Diane Sawyer that people talked about for years afterward. The marriage to Bobby Brown that had become, as publicly and painfully as possible, a slow catastrophe.
I thought I'd never live that way.
She had separated from Bobby in 2006. The divorce was finalized in 2007. And what people don't always acknowledge is that those years weren't just the end of a marriage. They were the end of a version of herself that she'd been carrying for almost 2 decades.
I had nowhere to go. Lost sight of my dream.
She went quiet, went into recovery, went back to basics. And in 2009, and with Clive Davis producing, with a world that wasn't sure what to expect, she released I Look to You. The album debuted at number 1 in over 20 countries. Number 1. The centerpiece of that comeback was a song called I Didn't Know My Own Strength, written by Diane Warren, but sung by a woman who had lived every syllable. I crashed down and I tumbled, but I did not crumble. I got through all the pain. She wasn't performing that lyric. She was reporting it. The song hit number 1 on the adult R&B chart, and the world exhaled. People who had grieved what she'd become, because that's what it was, grief, felt something release. Here's the part that breaks your heart. Less than 3 years after that comeback, February 11, 2012, Beverly Hills Hotel, Whitney Houston was found in the bathtub. She was 48 years old, and she never got to see how much that comeback still meant, how much it still means. How many people heard that song and found something in it to hold on to? She didn't know her own strength, but we did. Number 12, Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life, I Wish, 1976. August 6th, 1973. Stevie Wonder is in a car on Interstate 85 in North Carolina, coming off the biggest year of his career. Talking Book had just won him Grammys. Intervisions had just been released 3 days prior. He was 23 years old, and everyone in the music industry already knew this man was on a different level. Then a log falls off a flatbed truck in front of the vehicle. It crashes through the windshield. It hits Stevie Wonder directly in the head. He was airlifted to a hospital, brain surgery, and then a coma that lasted 4 days. His cousin came to see him and didn't know what else to do, so he leaned in close and started singing Higher Ground, the song Stevie had just recorded, softly, right next to his ear. And Stevie's fingers started moving. Like his body remembered the music, even when the rest of him was somewhere else. He eventually came back, but he couldn't taste anything, couldn't smell. And the question nobody wanted to ask out loud was whether any of what made him him, the internal architecture, the genius, whether any of that had survived. It had. What followed was 3 years of recording that produced Songs in the Key of Life, a double album plus a bonus EP, 21 tracks, every one of them written, produced, arranged, and largely performed by Wonder himself. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 and stayed there for 14 weeks. It won Album of the Year at the Grammys. Rolling Stone ranked it number 4 on their list of the greatest albums ever made. Elton John said, "Wherever I go in the world, I always take a copy of Songs in the Key of Life. For me, it's the best album ever made." He almost died. And somehow what came out the other side was that real talk, only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's $1 coffee a month, and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. Number 11, Al Green, The Bell Album, Take Me to the River, 1974 to 1977. By October 1974, Al Green was untouchable. 5 consecutive hits between 1971 and 1974. Tired of being alone. Let's stay together. I'm still in love with you. Call me. You ought to be with me. Over 20 million albums sold in 3 years. He was the most sensual, magnetic force in soul music. The voice, the presence, the whole thing. And then one night in Memphis, in his own bathroom, everything cracked open. A woman named Mary Woodson, who he hadn't known was married with children, had been seeing him for a while. She asked him to marry her. He said no. She waited. And when he came out of the bathtub, she poured a pot of boiling grits down his back. Then she walked into the next room and shot herself with his gun. He described the moment in his own words. My world exploded into 1,000 splatters of pure agony. He spent 8 months in the hospital, skin grafts, recovery, and in that stillness, reading the Bible, lying in a hospital bed while his career sat frozen. Something shifted that couldn't be unshifted. See, Take Me to the River had come out that same year as The Attack. A song about baptism, about surrender, about being washed clean. He hadn't known then how literal it would become. By 1976, he had built a church in Memphis and become an ordained pastor. The music world assumed Al Green was done. Then came the Bell album in 1977. Devotion to God woven into every groove. A different kind of Al Green, still that voice, still that intimacy, but stripped of the performance of seduction. What was left underneath it was something more honest, more human, harder to fake. Critics considered a masterpiece. Lou Reed called it one of the greatest albums he'd ever heard. It exists because a man survived one of the worst nights of his life and had no choice but to rebuild himself from scratch, starting with the music. Number 10, Toni Braxton, Unbreak My Heart, 1996. Toni Braxton didn't want to record this song. Let me say that again. The biggest hit of her career, 11 weeks at number 1, one of the best-selling singles in recorded history. She heard it and told the writer, no. Diane Warren pitched it. David Foster was attached to produce it. And Toni Braxton, one of the most powerful voices in R&B, said she didn't want to do it. Eventually, they persuaded her, and she delivered a vocal performance that made the world stop breathing. Unbreak My Heart went to number 1 in October 1996 and just stayed there 11 weeks. more than 2.5 months at the top of the chart. It's the number 2 best-selling single ever by a female recording artist. But here's what was happening behind the hit. While that record was selling millions of copies worldwide, Toni Braxton was discovering that her record contract had been quietly bankrupting her. She'd gone out on a massive tour. The costs were enormous. The deal was structured so that 60% of tour profits went to her co-headliner. The label wouldn't advance her money, and by the time the accounting was done, she was $4 million in debt. In January 1998, as Unbreak My Heart was still in the cultural bloodstream, Toni Braxton filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Think about that. The biggest single of your career, the song you nearly refused to make, still playing in every grocery store, every car radio, every slow dance moment across the world, and you're filing for bankruptcy. She won 5 Grammys, 5 American Music Awards, 3 MTV Video Music Awards. And then she lost everything. Sometimes the industry only remembers your peak, but never asks what it cost. Number 9, Teddy Pendergrass, Hold Me, Joy, 1982 to 1988. Before March 18th, 1982, Teddy Pendergrass was one of the most dominant forces in R&B, 5 consecutive solo platinum albums, women screaming at his shows, a baritone that made people feel things they didn't know they were capable of feeling. Then his Rolls Royce's brakes failed on the highway in Philadelphia. The car crossed the center line and hit 2 trees. His passenger walked away with minor injuries. Teddy Pendergrass never walked again. He was 31 years old, and the doctors told him he was paralyzed from the chest down. His music career, that voice, those stages, that presence, all of it suddenly looked like it was over. He spent over a year in intensive rehabilitation. And here's what I think about when I consider what that year must have been like. You're a man who built an entire identity around physical magnetism, around commanding a stage, around connection. And in one night, on one road, all of it changed. He could have disappeared. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, in 1984, he released Love Language. And on that album, in a duet with a young singer who was just beginning to break through herself, he recorded Hold Me. That singer was Whitney Houston before her debut album, before Saving All My Love, before any of it. Whitney Houston's first major hit was a duet with Teddy Pendergrass, recording from a wheelchair. The record became a top 10 adult contemporary hit. In 1985, he performed at Live Aid in that wheelchair in front of the world. In 1988, Joy hit number 1 on the R&B charts from a wheelchair after everything. I'm not sure there's a better definition of resilience in the history of this music. Number 8, Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, X Factor, 1998. You probably know that The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill won 5 Grammys at the 1999 ceremony, including Album of the Year. You probably know it changed what an R&B album could be, the intimacy of it, the scope of it, the way it moved between hip-hop and soul and gospel and heartbreak without losing a single thread. But I want you to sit with the conditions under which it was made. By 1997, the Fugees had effectively fallen apart. Wyclef Jean, her musical partner, the person she'd built something extraordinary with, had been having an affair with her while he was married to someone else. And when it ended, it didn't just end a romance. It ended a family. She was left holding the wreckage, heartbroken, feeling betrayed by people she had trusted completely. She was pregnant with Rohan Marley's child, and in the middle of all of it, she sat down and made an album. X Factor is the heart of that record. And if you've ever loved someone who kept hurting you, not out of cruelty maybe, but just because they couldn't stop, and if you've ever stayed longer than you should have because leaving felt like giving up something you'd fought for, that song knows exactly where you live. It could all be so simple, but you'd rather make it hard. She's not angry in that song. She's exhausted, and somehow that's worse. 5 Grammys, Album of the Year, 8 Grammy nominations in a single ceremony, a record at the time. She made all of that while her heart was still bleeding. You can hear it in every single note. Number 7, Mary J. Blige, No More Drama, 2001. Mary J. Blige told an interviewer once that every time she performs No More Drama in concert, she goes through 30 years of her life in about 5 minutes. She said she feels it all. Growing up in the Schlobum housing projects in Yonkers, watching women she loved get beaten by men they loved, watching those patterns repeat, getting into the same cycles herself. The alcohol, the cocaine, which she later revealed publicly. 6 years in an abusive relationship with Casey Haley of Jodeci, a man who publicly denied their engagement after he gave her a ring. She said she goes through all of that every single time she sings that song. She wants to give people the real truth. When Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis first played her No More Drama, she told them, "You've been following me around with a spy or something? This is exactly what I'm feeling. I'm not changing a thing. Not a single word." No more. The song samples Nadia's theme from The Young and the Restless, a soap opera, drama on a TV screen. But Mary J. Blige made it about something real, something that didn't have commercial breaks, something that left marks. No More Drama became the title track of her 5th studio album, released in August 2001. And if you remember that fall, the September 11th attacks happened less than 2 weeks after the album came out. The song took on a meaning even Blige hadn't planned for. A nation in shock, reaching for music that said, "Enough, no more pain." She gave people that while she was still fighting her own. If you've ever nodded along to that song, not as a listener, but as someone who recognized themselves in it, you know what I mean. Number 6, Donny Hathaway, Someday We'll All Be Free, a song for you, 1971 to 1973. Here's something most people don't know about Donny Hathaway. The song Someday We'll All Be Free, that gorgeous, soaring, hang on to the world as it spins around anthem, was written for him, about him, by his friend Edward Howard. Howard was watching Hathaway deteriorate, and he could do nothing except write him a song and hope he'd hear it. Donny Hathaway had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in the early 1970s. Yeah. At one point, he was prescribed 14 different medications twice a day. 14. And when he started feeling better on the medication, he'd stop taking it. And the illness would come back, and the cycle would start again. From 1973 to 1977, he was in and out of hospitals. his friendship with Roberta Flack, the partnership that gave the world Where Is the Love, and The Closer I Get to You, fractured under the weight of it. They didn't reconcile for years. But here's what gets me. During those same years, while he was battling auditory hallucinations, while his mental state was wreaking havoc on everyone around him, he was also making some of the most emotionally precise music anyone had ever heard. A Song for You, performed alone at the Troubadour in Los Angeles, just him and a piano after the band had already left, is considered one of the greatest live performances in soul music history. He was channeling something through the music that he couldn't contain in daily life, and sometimes I wonder if the music was the only space where it all made sense. January 13th, 1979. Donny Hathaway was found on the pavement outside the Essex House Hotel in New York, 15th floor. The glass on his window had been carefully removed. No signs of a struggle. He was 33 years old, and the album he'd been working on with Roberta Flack was unfinished. His daughter, Lala Hathaway, carries his voice forward, and every time you hear her, you hear him. The music outlives everything. Number 5, Neo. So Sick, 2006.
It's been months, and for some reason I just can't get over.
Let me ask you something. Have you ever been so heartbroken that you couldn't listen to the radio? Not because the music was bad, but because every love song that came on felt like someone was twisting a knife you already knew was there.
No more you, there's no more anniversary. I'm so fed up.
That was Neo, and that was the exact moment he wrote one of the biggest R&B singles of the 2000s. His name is Shaffer Chimere Smith. You know him as Neo. And by the mid-2000s, he had already been writing songs for other artists, Beyonce, Mario, quietly building a reputation behind the scenes. But his debut single, the one that would introduce him to the world, hadn't been written yet. Then a relationship ended, and the radio became unbearable. He couldn't listen to love songs anymore. Every melody felt like an accusation. Every chorus reminded him of someone who was gone.
With my thoughts of you and your memory, and now every song.
And instead of turning the radio off, instead of running from that pain, he picked up a pen. So Sick was written in what people close to him described as almost no time at all. Because he wasn't constructing a hit, he was writing a confession. I'm so sick of love songs, so tired of tears. That wasn't a creative choice. That was exactly how he felt, word for word.
Now that I'm alone, 'cause right now it says that.
The song dropped in January 2006 and went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart, his very first major release. And here's the thing that gets me. The world heard a smooth breakup anthem, but Neo heard something else when it played back.
Love songs, so tired of tears, so
He heard the moment his own heart broke, replayed, polished, and packaged, becoming the thing that would launch his entire career. Sometimes your lowest point is exactly where your highest moment is hiding.
sick of love songs, so sad and slow. So
Number 4, D'Angelo, Black Messiah, Really Love, 2014. After Voodoo dropped in 2000, after Untitled, How Does It Feel, changed what an R&B moment could look like. After that video redefined vulnerability and sensuality simultaneously, the world expected D'Angelo to keep going. He didn't. What happened after Voodoo is a story about what success can do to a person if they're not ready for what it costs. The attention that followed the Untitled video was intense in ways that he had not signed up for. The objectification, the loss of privacy, the feeling of being consumed. Then, in December 2000, the same year the album came out, He was in a serious car accident. Then came the years. D'Angelo, Michael Eugene Archer, and essentially vanished. He gained and lost enormous amounts of weight. He battled substance abuse and depression so severe that functioning was a daily negotiation. He didn't release new music for 14 years. 14 years of silence from one of the most gifted voices in the history of R&B. And then on December 15th, 2014, with no announcement, no promotional campaign, no warning of any kind, Black Messiah appeared. Streaming services, available immediately. A full album, fully realized. Critics didn't know what to do with how good it was. They called it a masterpiece. Rolling Stone gave it 5 stars. It won the Grammy for Best R&B Album in 2016. Really Love is the kind of song that stops time, that slows your whole nervous system down and reminds you why this music exists. He made Black Messiah in the ruins of 14 years of his life, and somehow, the darkness made it more true, more whole, more him. Some artists come back, some come back better. Number 3, Aretha Franklin, Respect, 1967. She was 19 years old when she married Ted White. He was 30. He became her manager. He became a controlling, volatile, and by multiple documented accounts, physically abusive presence in her life for the 8 years they were together. Gospel great Mahalia Jackson, watching from the outside, told Time magazine in 1968, "I don't think she's happy. Somebody else is making her sing the blues." That was the atmosphere. That was what Aretha Franklin carried into the studio every day. January 1967, she travels to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, Fame Studios, to begin recording her first album for Atlantic Records. A session that everyone involved believed would be historic. It lasted one day. Ted White got drunk, got into a physical altercation with a horn player, screamed at the studio owner. Aretha, who had been living with that volatility for years, went AWOL, disappeared for a week and a half, didn't answer calls. Then she reappeared in New York City with the Muscle Shoals musicians who'd flown in to finish what they started. And on February 14, 1967, Valentine's Day, Aretha Franklin walked into the studio and recorded Respect. She took Otis Redding's song, A Man's Plea to His Woman, and completely rewired it. She added the spelling. She added the socket to me. She added the demand where there had been a request. And in doing so, she turned a pop song into a statement of war. Otis Redding heard her version and said, "That little girl done took my song away from me." Respect went to number 1 on June 3rd, 1967, on both the R&B and pop charts. Her first number 1. Deared and Aretha Franklin, who had spent years living without the thing she was now demanding, delivered it like someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. She separated from Ted White in 1968. The divorce was finalized in 1969. She won her first 2 Grammys for that record. She spent years never talking about what those years with Ted White were really like, because some things you can only say with music. Number 2, Sam Cooke, A Change Is Gonna Come, 1964.
Oh, yes it will.
October 8th, 1963, Shreveport, Louisiana. Sam Cooke, the most commercially successful black artist of his era, the man with Chain Gang and Twisting the Night Away and You Send Me, calls ahead to the Holiday Inn North to book rooms for himself and his wife Barbara. He has a show at the Municipal Auditorium that night.
but he winds up.
He arrives. The desk clerk looks up, looks at him, and says there are no vacancies. They both knew what that meant. His brother Charles protested. Barbara tried to calm Sam down. She said, "Sam, they'll kill you." He told her, "They ain't gonna kill me because I'm Sam Cooke."
On by the river.
They were eventually persuaded to leave. As they drove away, they blew the car horn and shouted, "Because what else do you do when America has just reminded you that your name means nothing to certain people?" When they arrived at the black motel across town, the police were waiting. They arrested Sam Cooke for disturbing the peace.
Coming, but I know a change gonna.
That same year, Sam Cooke had heard Bob Dylan's "Blowin' in the Wind" on the radio and been stopped cold by it, shamed in a way. A young white folk singer was writing about the pain of black America more directly, more devastatingly than Sam had dared. He felt the embarrassment of that, the urgency of it.
Oh, and just like the river.
And then Shreveport happened. He wrote, "A change is going to come within weeks." His biographer said it was less work than any song he'd ever written. He performed it once on The Tonight Show on February 7th, 1964. Bobby Womack heard it and told him the song sounded like death. Sam agreed. He never sang it publicly again.
And I say, brother.
On December 11th, 1964, Sam Cooke was fatally shot at a motel in Los Angeles. 2 weeks later, the single was released as a B-side. The civil rights movement adopted it immediately. The city of Shreveport issued a formal apology to his family 56 years later in 2019. Some songs outlast everything.
A change gonna come. Oh, yeah.
Number 1, Marvin Gaye, "What's Going On," 1971. Let me tell you where Marvin Gaye was in the spring of 1970. His duet partner and close friend Tammi Terrell, the woman he'd made "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" with, the woman who had collapsed in his arms on stage during a performance in October of 1967, who had spent nearly 3 years fighting a brain tumor, died on March 16th, 1970. She was 24 years old. He was devastated. He stopped performing, withdrew completely, grew a beard, gained weight, started using cocaine. His marriage to Anna Gordy, Berry Gordy's sister, was collapsing. He was 30 years old and he didn't know if he wanted to make music anymore. And his younger brother Frankie had just come home from Vietnam. Marvin used to receive letters from Frankie while he was still overseas. Letters about what he was seeing, about the horror of it, about the confusion of fighting for a country that was fighting against its own people at home. And when Frankie came back, Marvin sat with him and listened to the stories and wept. He said later, "I was very much affected by letters my brother was sending me from Vietnam, as well as the social situation here at home." A song called "What's Going On," originally written by Four Tops member Obie Benson after witnessing a police beatdown of protesters at an anti-Vietnam protest in Berkeley, landed in his lap. Motown hadn't wanted it, but Marvin rewrote it, rebuilt it around everything he was carrying. He recorded the album himself, paid for sessions himself, brought in Detroit Lions players to do the ambient conversation you hear at the top of the record, a homecoming party for a Vietnam veteran, brought in extra musicians, insisted on a doubled vocal track that his engineer had accidentally discovered. When he brought it to Motown's Quality Control Board, the committee that had to approve all releases, they voted it down. Berry Gordy rejected it. Only Stevie Wonder defended the song. Marvin Gaye threatened to never record for Motown again. Gordy released it. What's Going On hit number 1 on the R&B chart in 1971. Mercy, Mercy Me Inner City Blues. The album, which Rolling Stone later named the greatest album of all time, changed what popular music was allowed to say. It forced Motown to give other artists, including Stevie Wonder, the artistic freedom they'd been asking for. He made it from the deepest grief of his life. He made it while his body was failing him and his marriage was ending and his brother's trauma was still ringing in his head. He made it because he had no other way to survive what he was feeling. And because of that, because of everything it cost him, 50 plus years later, it still sounds like the most necessary piece of music ever recorded.